All right, welcome to another episode of New Wine Uncorked. We are stoked to have you here with us once again. I'm Matt Farlow.
Hey, and I'm Phil Berlin. We have on the line three youth directors from the Portland and Beaverton area. So we have Lane, we have Jaron, we have Andre. And they serve in Portland. So why don't each one of you guys just introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your church? So we'll start with Lane.
Yeah, my name's Lane. I'm the youth director and young adults pastor at Beaverton Foursquare Church. Our church has been in a state of transition over the last year. Our lead pastor was there for like 16 years. He actually recently was just elected as the denomination's new president. And so he went on to bigger and better things, but with a lot of reservations in his heart because he loved his community. And so we saw a lead pastor change. I was new to this role as the director. And then about 3 months after, COVID hit. And so we're kind of starting from the ground up. We're figuring out, what's our identity moving forward, and how do we really build a healthy and consistent youth ministry in the midst of all this? So,
For sure. Miss Jaron.
Yeah, I'm Jerren Wadsworth. I'm the youth pastor at West Hills Covenant Church in West Portland, and I've been there coming up on 4 years now, which is exciting. And we're a small church. We're about 150 on a Sunday, and we are have a growing youth group. So we have about 25 students on the roster. So started really small. I think I had like 8 when I first started. So we're growing, which is great. And yeah, it's been interesting with everything happening, learning to adapt and change, and growing with this group of kids and learning how to love them well in the midst of separation.
Absolutely. Thank you. Andre.
Yes, I'm Andre Alberti. I am the youth director over at Mount Olivet Baptist Church. I've been in my official role a little bit over a year and a half. COVID virus kind of extends it out, Before that, volunteering wise, I've been working within the ministry for over 20 years. So before being a part of the staff. As for ministry, we are, I would say, like Brother Lane, we're always we've been in a state of flux. Our lead pastor retired. We've had a new pastor came on board last September officially. And obviously, if you go from September to February, that's not a lot of time where you have face-to-face. And we're learning how we want to go about effectively impacting people's lives, still being connected with respecting the COVID virus that's out there on top of the other elements we'll talk about today. So, yeah.
Joe, thank you. And thank you guys all for being here, definitely. So during this time, we're going to just have a conversation on how just all the adjustments that these youth ministries have had to make during this time of COVID and protests and everything that's going on right now. So let's start this off. So when Governor Kate Brown issued the stay-at-home order to prohibit large gatherings, what were your first thoughts and what was going on in the staff of your church? So we'll start with Andre.
Wow, you're going to start with me. What large gatherings eliminates us from gathering from my particular church body. So for us, it was definitely a shocker. We quickly were looking, how do we transition to not lose connection with young people? Because they are, they're current day, they're right now type kids. So if you don't give them attention right now, they'll find something else that will. So staff wise, we haven't actually been on site together, not for a meeting since the whole shelter in process. We've been working through what does it look like to, like I said, honor what the governor is saying, respecting the COVID virus, and yet still stay connected. So we even do our meetings and conversations on Zoom chats like we're doing now. But we've definitely had to switch to a more distance learning type approach. In spite of the fact we love to give hugs, we love to greet each other, have a good laugh. So that's been what the immediate response was. And it was definitely a shocker, but it's been good to have what I didn't mention earlier. Mount Olivet has both the West and the North campus, even though we function as one church. So it was nice to get our young people from both campuses together on the Zoom call because there wasn't a reason to travel anywhere. They could just tap in, as the young people say.
Yeah, sure. We'll go to Lane next.
Yeah, I think like everyone else, when the pandemic hit and quarantine went into effect, it kind of felt like The Walking Dead around our campus. There's just no one there. Cars are gone. Our church is a pretty big church, and so we had to put a pretty big halt on like everything we were doing when it came to gathering, when it came to events, when it came to anything at all. And so that was difficult, and we realized that we were going to have to lean into the online experience. And I think, like a lot of other churches, we realized we are not prepared to do that well. And a lot of these online churches that we were like making fun of before, all of a sudden were like our role models, right? And we're like, oh my gosh, we quickly discounted these tools that these churches were using, and now we're completely reliant on them. And so that was kind of incredible and a humbling place. I'll be honest, I was always really skeptical of the online church. I had to repent. I had to be like, you know what? These guys were looking ahead into the future and trying to figure out, how do we serve people where they are? And so we quickly learned. I think we were fortunate, we were blessed in that our infrastructure, we had some equipment, we had some staff in place to kind of facilitate that, but we had to definitely hire some new people, which again, really thankful that in the midst of the season we had the opportunity to hire new people, but to help us with those online experiences. And then this other layer was, okay, since we can't do anything that we normally do, like, why are we here? And we began to think like, okay, so the church isn't here just to have like really good services. We're here to be a healing presence in our neighborhood. So where people are trapped in their homes, people are getting laid off their jobs, how do we do that? And so we started simply by going to our local school district and saying, hey, there are some kids that they rely on going to school for like lunch. So how can we help make sandwiches? And that turned into this thing that snowballed to where we were receiving deliveries. They were like, hey, we've got 9,000 pounds of chicken. Do you guys want to help distribute that? Crazy stuff like that. And our church became this crazy hub for like the Oregon Food Bank. And it became this really cool opportunity for us to serve our neighborhood. And in a lot of ways, I was grateful that there was kind of this awakening, like the church is there to be a presence to heal, there to be a presence to serve. And our students jumped right into, which I thought was really great. And we as pastors had to kind of step up and say, okay, now how do we connect with these students relationally when we can't be with them? We're making cold calls, we're texting, we're Zooming, and we're doing all that. And we had to get creative.
Nice. Thanks for sharing. Jaron, how about you?
Well, I was like blissfully ignorant and really optimistic, and I thought, no way this is lasting more than 2 weeks. So I was like, two-week break, and we're coming back. Like, I didn't plan, I didn't like look into anything, and then I was like, oh no, this is lasting a really long time. And so I was like, oh, I have to think on my feet. And so I was emailing out my parents like, hey, can you help me? Like, what should I do here? So they were the ones who linked me up with Zoom and starting Zoom youth group, which I thought was super awkward and like really uncomfortable at first. And now it's like second nature, right? As you learn and grow. But yeah, I was not, I'm very, very optimistic. So I thought there was no way it would last longer than 2 weeks. So I really had to switch my game plan. And like Lane was saying, like I had to really evaluate, like, what is youth group without crazy games, like where we run around and throw things at each other? What is youth group without food? What is youth group without all these things? And so like strip it back down, and what is it that the youth really need? And so it was really a great exercise for me at this point in my ministry, being there for 4 years, like kind of going back to basics and like, what do we really want? And it came down to connection. Like the kids just need connection, and they just want to know that I'm there. And so whether, I tried to be really hip and do like Snapchat and Marco Polo, and that's not me. I'm not very good at that stuff. I am not hip. And so it just, phone calls and text messages, and awkward Zoom things. I even threw a virtual retreat because I had to cancel a retreat. So talk about awkward, but we made it through and we made it work. So that's how we're navigating this time. And our staff is small and none of us are very good at technology. So it's been super awkward and really like a growing curve. But we're finally, getting the hang of it. So.
Yeah. Do you guys think that, it's a misconception, or maybe this is not at your churches, but that the youth pastors would be the most equipped to do this because, technology, and you're dealing with all these youth. So like you guys are the go-to for your church. Oh, hey, well, we don't know what we're doing with technology. So just go talk to the people who deal with the youth?
I'm gonna jump in here and I'm gonna get myself in trouble because I know you guys are gonna post this. No, the expectation wasn't that I understood social media. So I actually put people in shock when I was like, here's your platform, here's your platform, here's your platform, here's how we reach them. This is what they're doing. Everybody's eyes, virtually looked at me like, how do you know this? And when have you been? I was like, I've been talking to our young people on this. It's just not been our main way of talking to them. So the expectation wasn't there for me. It's actually been something I've had fun with as we've reinforced what they're actually into. That's my quick short. But hey, boss man, I love you though. I love you, boss.
All right, Pastor Wendell will be okay. So
See, I didn't call him out by name. Why you do that?
All right. How about the rest of you guys? Lane or Jared, how was the response when it just came with social media and stuff? Was everyone kind of expecting you to know what to do now because you're the person that handles the young people at your church?
Not so much. I think they know that I'm terrible at technology. We have co-pastors, and one of Mark, he is one of the co-pastors, and he used to be a youth pastor. So I think they rely on, he's kind of our go-to tech guy. They all kind of fell on him for all this.
Understood.
Yeah, I think I've never really been that guy ever. No one's ever made that mistake of thinking Lane knows what's cool and hip. It's never been a problem for me. So no, the pressure didn't fall on me to be that for our church. Luckily, we have a communications department, and they are really great at what they do. So we were heavily relying on them, saying like, help us figure this out. So it was a learning curve for sure.
Absolutely. So let's dive a little bit more into, go ahead, sir.
I was going to say, I think the other thing, and I think Lane just mentioned it, I want to make sure I heard right. We actually didn't have somebody that was our point person for social media because that person actually had changed jobs right when this was about to hit. So we've actually had to rebuild our social media department in audio, video, what it looks like. So in the midst of COVID, it wasn't just learning what the kids were like. It was like, okay, how do we maintain the platform? And who do we bring on that understands it and grow? So we're building a team for it.
Yeah, so let's dive a little bit more into the social media stuff. I know as a youth pastor, you've used social media for stuff, posting videos from events, pictures from events, and all those kind of things, and maybe you've used it to stay in touch with your kids. How has your perspective on social media in general changed over this whole process, it becoming kind of the main way of you talking and dialogue, engaging with your kids? So we'll start with Jaron here.
Well, my perspective has changed quite a bit because I'm not big into social media. I do use it. I can't use it with my kids because I have certain kids who I'm not allowed to post pictures of them. And so I'm not allowed to, I just generally just shy away from that for safety reasons. But I kind of viewed it as a distraction and something that I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I don't want her always seeing mommy on her phone. And I also want to model healthy, you don't have to have your life revolve around social media, to my students. So it was always something I was like, okay, that's a distraction. I really don't want to go there. But so then this all happened and it was like, oh, okay, I have how do I used to heavily rely on one-on-ones, going to coffee or dinner or, hanging out with them, going to their sporting events. And so, having to, again, redefine, strip back, how do I still connect with you? So in the beginning, it was a lot of text. Like I said, I tried, I have a Snapchat and I never use it because I'm super lame. And I tried Marco Polo, but videoing I was just this is so weird. And so I was really trying all these different avenues. But I just started texting and the students and probably way too much and tried to throw in some memes to be cool and every once in a while, and they just laugh and roll their eyes, I'm assuming. But just texting and then setting up phone dates with me so that if they are interested and they want to. A lot of my more extroverted kids are dying during this time, right? They're just shriveling on the inside, and I know that because I'm extroverted. So just setting up a time where I can just we talk about anything, nothing, everything, all the things, nothing doesn't have to be spiritual or deep. And so trying to use the things that are available to help them feel loved and connected. And like I said, I tried a virtual retreat. And I actually, since I have a smaller youth group, I drove to all of my kids' houses and I dropped off Pop-Tarts, because every Sunday morning we have Pop-Tarts. And so, but that was like from Damascus to Hillsborough. So it took me 8.5 hours, but I did it. And so that was a lot of fun, and let them pick out like a Pop-Tart flavor and got to see them, but yeah, social media is now, I see it more as like their lifeline, like they, not so much as their distraction anymore, but like this is because as youth get older, they stray away from the family and they're building this tribe of friends, right? And they really, really need that connection. And now that's been taken out from underneath them. And so it's like this social media is an avenue where they can still be safe in that tribe of friends. And so just trying to find a way that we can be a part of it and also set healthy boundaries, which I think is really important when it comes to social media.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That's good. It's nice. That's nice. We'll go to Andre.
Social media, what I felt about it before, I didn't like it. Let's just be honest. I like posting stuff every now and again. I do like to check and see what's happening, but it wasn't the avenue where I wanted the most interaction. Since COVID hit, it's been a great space to say, hey, we can link up, we can connect. But I felt that even with the Zoom, it wasn't the best way. So what ended up happening for me, because I am, like you guys have already mentioned, trying to talk to people one-on-one, we created WhatsApp groups. So we could have at least a group texting platform where the kids can actually say, hey, I don't want to just talk or hear you guys on our Thursday Zoom call. I want to actually ask questions, and I have concerns, and I got prayers. I got an event I was checking out, or my birthday came up. Those things we do in a place where they can communicate that quickly. But for me, I would also say I've also learned that I'm real comfortable with Facebook, but I'm old. Just be honest. I'm super comfortable with it. I'm like, everybody should be able to use it. And then I realized when we're doing the survey, Instagram is what they're on. But then the other one that comes up is TikTok. And I was like, I'm not doing TikTok. I'm not doing it. I opened it up. I previewed. I'm not doing it. So for me, it's been fun trying to figure out what I feel comfortable with. And yet in the same breath, like we all want to protect ourselves. So we don't want to be, I've always kept a distance between my personal page and what's going on with the church stuff. So the kids don't necessarily know or follow my personal page. A couple of them found me, but it's still one of those ones where it's like, I don't feel comfortable. That's coming from my education background. I didn't really let kids into that world. So this has definitely still been a different walk for me as I'm trying to figure out what's okay to let kids in, because I'm dealing with middle schoolers and high schoolers. And I'm sorry, I don't really want a middle school girl or boy saying, hey, I follow my youth pastor all the time. And, I'm not, it's just Andre Alberti on there. It's not youth pastor. So.
And thanks for sharing that, man. Follow up there a little bit. Let's go to Lane. How's your perspective on social media changed during this time?
Yeah, I'll say I wasn't very good at it before, and I still haven't figured it out. Just want to qualify that. I do not feel like we've mastered the use of social media in the midst of this. It's been a lot of trial and error. A lot of us seeing what's going to stick, seeing what's working and what's not. And honestly, we saw some drop off, especially with our middle school students. We found that our high school students were a little more engaged with social media, but our middle school students, especially some of our younger ones, like our 6th grade, 7th grade, they weren't as engaged on those social media platforms because they're still kind of more integrated with their family unit and their parents. They're kind of following their parents' lead. And so, we're having to engage with the parents of the middle schoolers more so than the students themselves. And then we're having to engage more with the high school students rather than the parents. And so it was this weird dance that we were trying to figure out. We did an outreach event on YouTube. That was interesting. Executed really well. Dropped the ball a little bit on follow-up because it's hard to follow up with an outreach when you can't be together in the same room. And so it was a lot of stuff that worked and stuff that didn't. We also did these things where we were visiting students' houses for a while. In our staff meetings, we were calling them drive-bys, and we realized we had to stop calling them that. especially for the promotional material. But we were driving to students' houses and visiting them and doing videos, and they appreciated that in-person contact. One thing that our communications team was trying to help us with, because again, we have a pretty large staff, lots of ministries spread out all over the place. Everyone had a social media platform, and the second that COVID hit, we gripped it because that was all we had left. It was like, this is my only tool that I have to like pastor or serve the people that I'm in. And we got a little defensive about it. And our church started realizing, this is our content that we're releasing into the world, and there's no uniformity, there's no cohesion in style or in content or in language. And so it kind of became a moment where we had to, sorry, that's my dog, a moment where we had to take a step back and say, how are we using language when we talk about ministry? Are we unified in our efforts and our thinking? And although I was resistant to it at first, I realized that that kind of effort was going to be helpful for us moving forward. And part of that was quality over quantity. The second COVID hit, obviously, the church got louder on social media, but so did everything else and everyone else. And so we wanted to figure out, okay, how do we not contribute to the noise? How do we make our posts and the things that we do intentional and carry weight? Because if they don't, I barely read the emails that my lead pastor sends if he's watching. Sorry, Brad. You know what I mean? Like our parents and our students aren't going to be reading every little thing that we send. And so we had to figure out how do we make it count? And part of that, I think, I was with you, Jaron. I started trying to figure out how do I use the social media platforms for personal follow-up. And so I got an account on Calendly, and, I put the link, and that was one thing I did a little differently than Andre. And that, I think that's just a personal choice is, do you, as a pastor, do you integrate your ministry and your personal life together on social platforms, or do you keep them separate? I've seen it done both ways. I think there's a right or a healthy and an unhealthy way to do both. But I started realizing, especially when it came to some of the stuff that were happening in our cultural moment, protests and things happening with race and now with everything, with the election coming up, our students were paying attention to what we had to say on social media. So we had to figure out how to balance, like, how do we say, our personal liberty of speech and opinion, but also carry the weight of, who's listening to you and who's watching and how do you go about saying those things. And so I put the Calendly link to make an appointment with me on Zoom, just 20 minutes. We can grab coffee. I can pray for you. I can pray for you. So that's in my link, in my bio on my Instagram right now. And people know they can go there and arrange a time with me. And so anyway, that's how we've kind of been leveraging social media.
I have to bite your Zoom calendar idea. I like that.
Yeah.
All right, so I got to follow up with you guys, Lane and Jaron, who's done events over Zoom. What was the high note, and then what was the thing where you're like, yo, I will never do that part again, at least? So it was the high point and low point. So we'll start with Jaron.
I think maybe a high and a low was I tried to do a talent show over Zoom. So there was some really, really great things, and there were some like maybe like less great, like a little bit less great. And so, there's awkward points, of course, in any talent show, when there's any talent show in general. And so, but what I really, really appreciated is I've been using this time to do a lot of research. So I was reading a lot of Sticky Faith and Growing Young, and just really trying to kind of this shift in youth ministry culture, that it's like less about like crazy games and fun and more about like how do we keep our students' faith that gives them faith that lasts, and so I've been reading that, and I read that hearing adults' faith journey, their struggles and their journeys, is really helpful. So I had my leaders give their story, their faith story. And then, so each of 4 of our leaders, we shared, and then we would just do a small group, a breakout group afterwards, and discuss. They had questions that they had shared, but it was really real, because you're hearing people's, like these adults that they see over Zoom each week, and then you just they get to talk about how their faith journey is going. And so I think that was a high for me. I think the low is just when you try to make a game or something, big and crazy, and really just what it is on Zoom, it's just like we're just looking at each other, and just talking. I tried to do a scavenger hunt in their house, where I would yell. I would say, "Find me a toothpick," and they'd run and go get it, and show it to me. And mom called me and said, "My girls just broke a picture frame," and so I was like, maybe we won't, do that in the future. I'm really sorry. Trying to make it crazy on Zoom was maybe an error. Anyways.
That's good. It's good. Lane, go ahead.
Yeah. Gosh, where to start with Zoom? We started doing Zoom pretty much right away. And so again, a lot of trial and error. One thing that's really hard on Zoom is worship. I'm sure you guys all encountered that. You got to have everyone mute. Otherwise, there's just cacophony of singing happening in different times. And even my wife and I led worship for a women's event that our church did. And we set up a really nice microphone and got the lights on nice. But when it gets filtered through Zoom, all of it sounds the same. It just sounds like garbled mess. So all that effort, and it just sounded like, so, we still do Zoom, or still did worship over Zoom, although now we've gone into socially distanced in-person meetings with the Zoom option. With our smaller ministries, not with everyone, because some of our ministries are too big to adhere to the number guidelines. But yeah, worship's always a little difficult, although I found that people appreciated having something rather than nothing. I think one thing that we realized pretty quickly was that shorter was going to be better. Me, like a lot of pastors I'm sure that are listening, are kind of long-winded when it comes to it. We think that our sermons are the best thing that people have ever heard, and so we keep going. And I realized that, the 18-minute rule for TED Talks is even shorter when it comes to a Zoom call. People's attention span just can't lock in. And so we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we actually were in a teaching series through the entire New Testament with our young adults that I was leading. And I was like, this is not going to work over Zoom. And so we switched to a reflection series on parables that were briefer, 15 minutes. And then we facilitated small groups on Zoom. So we bit the bullet and we bought that membership for the $15 a month for Zoom or whatever to do the small group facilitations. And we spent probably a third to half of our meetings in those small groups. And actually that proved to be helpful for new people. Ironically, we had new people join our ministry for the first time in Zoom. And oddly enough, you kind of have this weird opportunity to have conversations and meet people that you maybe wouldn't in a overwhelming social setting. And so people are kind of introducing themselves for the first time on Zoom. The middle schoolers didn't connect as well over in Zoom. That's the one thing I did want to talk about, is that we did see fall off. And I think even at the beginning where we had decently strong numbers, it declined over time because people were getting exhausted with doing things on a screen. It was everything for anything was on Zoom. And so people were just I'm tired of it. I even found our family was having a hard time watching our church services on Sundays online, and I'm on staff at the church. So it was just getting a little tiring, and I think part of it was just learning how to release that and say, you know what, we're doing the best we can in a difficult situation. And, our Zoom call isn't going to be the thing that keeps them close to Jesus during this time. It might be for some people. It's that's the one thing they cling to, but also we had to trust that the families were discipling, that we were reaching out one-on-one pastorally, that there were other tools at our disposal besides these gatherings, these services that we were trying to put on. We ended up doing a tacky prom, which is kind of fun because a lot of seniors and high school students didn't get to do their prom or graduate or anything like that. So we did a senior celebration and an 8th grade celebration, and we did a dance where it was just a bunch of silly games and youth leaders having fun. And we honestly didn't see huge numbers for any of those events, but the students that did show up, they appreciated it and they enjoyed it. And so I think it was the fact that we were making an effort that was being noticed. But yeah, I do think that our students, especially our younger ones, are kind of getting really burnt out on the screen thing. And the more creative ways that we can come up with, ministering outside of that, I think will be helpful. If anyone has any opinions or pointers out there, I'd love to hear them.
I would laugh only because, unlike y'all, where you guys actually did an event, I wouldn't consider ours a major event. I did a movie night. And so I had to learn Zoom, wouldn't do the whole screen share. If it's off of YouTube, even if I bought it, didn't matter. So I had to do a whole setup to be able to show my living room TV to do this movie night. And the first time we had a good turnout. Kids were having great conversation in the chat box, you know, interacting with the movie. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. So I tried it 3 weeks later. Had a steep fall off. Tried it 3 weeks later, had 2 kids show up. Third one logged in right before it ended. And I was like, what just happened? And then everybody started asking me what's going on with the movie nights. And I'm like, y'all didn't show up. You know, I got to do a whole setup. So I think that it is a burnout, but also, like I was telling my wife, when we laughed, we said the sun started coming out. People started, before the government said you could go do something, people were starting to go do stuff. And it's like the sun's staying up later. So even though 7 o'clock was our movie start time, it's still daylight outside. They're not trying to log on. So some of the reality of just the shift in season has impacted what was happening for us. Sorry, I know I wasn't asking.
No, that's perfect. That was perfect. Yeah, I was gonna ask if you did have any events, and thank you. That was good. So now in the middle of the COVID crisis, we started hearing stories and introduced to people named Not Aubree, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. Those videos were released, those stories were released, and the city went in uproar after that. So I want to ask, how did you broach this topic with your students, and how did they respond? We'll start with Lane.
Oh, of course, yeah. Firstly, I think I think Not Aubree was the first story that really grabbed me, and I kind of had to let it grab me, and I had to like let it sink in, because I think there's a lot of tendency in me to react to things, and like as the pastor, move in. How do I lead? How do I guide? How do I? But I had in that historical cultural moment, take a step back and say, okay, how am I processing this? How is it affecting me? And I remember that young man, I can't remember his name now. I can't believe it's blanking. I follow him, but he's the 14-year-old kid who put out that little song, "I'm a Young Black Man." I remember I watched that in my spare room right before a Zoom meeting, and I'm just bawling in tears. And I realized that God did that intentionally. He had to prepare my heart for what I was about to teach on that night, which was we were talking about race, and we were talking about faith, and that had to be a moment where the reality of what was happening needed to penetrate my heart before I was able to lead in those moments. So it's you know, and again, not being a person of color, dealing with those things day in and day out, I understand that I speak from a place of opportunity and privilege in that regard. But yeah, it's been an emotionally difficult season for me and my wife as we process these things, and we figure out what is our place in the midst of this. How do we facilitate conversations? How do you deal with family members? Blah, blah, blah. And, you know, our students were in the same exact spot. It was interesting to see, because I'm over young adults, high school and middle school, kind of seeing how each age group was processing. It was different. Because with the young adults, you're seeing still some of the remnants of the millennial generation. The high school students, you're seeing the coming of age Gen Z, and in the middle school, you're kind of seeing that middle ground with Gen Z. And you know, I basically told our staff, I was like, let's not go a week without at least touching on and addressing the things that are happening in the current culture, because everyone's having a conversation about it. We're not going to always allow the world events to dictate what we're teaching and how we're pastoring, but right now it felt like a significant cultural moment, and we need to know what Jesus is saying about it. And so I said, even if it's just a prayer, even if the only thing we can dish out is Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, let's address it, let's talk about it. And so we started teaching from passages in the scripture. The parable series ended up being really great for this, turns out. And we even went intentionally and brought in outside voices to speak into this conversation specifically. So we had an event called A Conversation on Race. And then we did that church-wide as well, and invited students to that. Yeah, I think it was interesting to see the young adults respond to it. You know, you're seeing people that are a little more active on social media, speaking out with these things. You're seeing them participate in the marches, participate in the protests. They're very active in the conversation. High school, it was varied. Some were completely silent on the issue, and others were more active. What I thought was really interesting was for middle school, our small group leaders reported that a lot of the students were kind of just giving back the rhetoric that they were hearing their parents say, which gave us an interesting window into how the parents were processing through all of these things. And it kind of reinforced that the parental units for middle school is really, really crucial. And how the parents are processing and what they're modeling is exactly what the middle schoolers are going to model. And that comes to love or hate. And so that was really interesting, seeing that. Our church participated in the Blackout Tuesday as well. Our president of our denomination did it first, and it kind of gave all of the other churches permission, like, oh, okay, we can do this too. And I feel like I'm babbling now, but it's been a complex and complicated thing. And we've just been doing the best that we can to keep the conversation in front of us. We don't always have the answers. We can't bring the solutions all the time, but we're saying Jesus is the Lord of the world, and he has peace that he wants to bring to every broken situation. So what does that look like, and how do we best do that? And so, that was a lot, but that's kind of how we've been processing. So.
Man, no, appreciate that. Appreciate all of that. Sister Jerren, how about you? How did your church process this? How did your youth group process this? How did they respond?
Yeah, well, in lots of different ways. I think we are a very eclectic group of people, and so we have both ends on like very on both extremes, and so it's really interesting. And I think Phil, our church is very driven by racial reconciliation, and that's been a big focus on ours in the last year. So that's really helpful to just kind of fall in line with like what pastors Mark and Stephanie have been setting for us in the sermons that we hear. And then, as in for the youth ministry, it's been something that, like Lane, I'm biracial, so I'm half Middle Eastern, but I present white. So I've always just been very cautious about coming to this, like talking about this issue. And it's honestly something that has scared me. And so this was like okay, enough. We can't not talk about this. Like, we have to talk about this. And I have leaders who are very passionate. Our church is very passionate about it. So they've often kind of come around and their insight has really helped. But during this time, I really leaned on resources, like from the Bible Project. Their justice video was really helpful to launch discussions, because we have youth group. Yeah, I love that video, love the Bible Project. That was really helpful. So really just honed in on youth group for lesson time. But then I also started, during the pandemic, we started small groups during the week over Zoom. And that, I really wanted that time to be a space where they can just talk. So we would lead discussions week after week about the current climate and what was happening, how they're feeling, how they're processing it. And a lot of it, like Lane was saying, a lot of it is, they're absorbing it from their parents, but sometimes they need space to process and question, and a safe place for them to do that. And also really trying to make it safe, because I do have lots of varying opinions, in the youth ministry. So I think my focus was on some teaching on Sunday nights, but then really wanting to create that space where they can have a safe dialogue and talk to each other about what was going on and how they're feeling about it, a place where they could process it in a safe way, in a way that, like we can love and also share God's heart in that situation. So just for our youth ministry, it was mainly providing a discussion space. And our church has been doing classes on this issue from, like Pastor Mark will teach a white perspective, Pastor Stephanie will teach a people of color perspective, so this is something that we're really like engaging with as a church right now, and trying to love the best way, and to have Jesus's heart for this.
Amen. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Jaron. Appreciate that. Andre.
I'm gonna give the non-church answer, because it's one of the ones where I say we've been engaging with it, even if you didn't realize it, for years. So when these incidents occurred, it was more from, I'm gonna start with the young people. My middle schoolers didn't get it. It didn't hit them. And then my high schoolers, I found out some of them, even their parents had covered them to where they didn't even know what happened. Not until the riots occurred here, downtown, and part of the protest, did they even know something had occurred, because they don't have access to social media like that, depending on the kid. The other extreme of it is that one of my kids, who I thought was going into high school, found out he's only going in the 8th grade. And you know this one, as soon as I tell you what he did, he started designing like the face mask with Black Lives Matter. He did paintings, and he's already an artist, but he used this time to say, hey, like, I'm shedding tears even though you don't see them. So he's been able to express what's going on for him. Whereas when I ask the young people, they give me a blank stare. So if I'm asking them face to face, there's nothing that's spoken to, but we put it in a survey, try to make it more anonymous, and they tell me, well, I'm still thinking about stuff, or I don't know how to process it, or this is the scary part, it doesn't impact me, because for them, they haven't had that experience and they're sheltered enough. So for me, it's been not so much my high schoolers that it's impacted, it's been with my young men and the men that I work with. So on that end of things, it's been a space of saying, how do we properly channel and feel everything that we're feeling and yet still reflect Christ? And because of those conversations, it filtered down to my young people in the way that we've focused the youth ministry, saying, how do you function as knowing that your mandate is to love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor? Well, hold on, how do you forgive when you don't necessarily feel like they've asked for forgiveness or done anything to be forgiven? How do you walk out choosing, no matter what's occurred, to trust that God is in control? So we've been dealing with scripture. I love how Lane brought up the parables, because we sat there, dealt with the parables too, and helped the students to see that, look, it wasn't who was expected that helped when it came to the Good Samaritan story. It was the person that you didn't expect. And saying that it's okay to have feelings. So for myself, I'm part of another group, and we sat there and they allowed us to do similar to what the blackout was supposed to be, whereas the voices of folks are getting heard. They did we're doing a Zoom call, and if you're not African-American, would you please black out your screen and just listen? They had us do a conversation, me, 3 other brothers and a sister, and we just talked about what we were feeling. And that's why I say those conversations helped me when it came to how I interacted with, I do a young men's life group. Some of them are older, some younger. And we talked through some of the things, not having necessarily an answer, but understanding that, hey, it's okay for us to feel stuff. And I felt like for the youth, it's one of those ones where I didn't want to force them to feel something, because they're already dealing with, and Jaron, I love my sis over here, you already talked about it. People that need a physical interaction are dying during this COVID shelter in, and then you throw in there that now you're telling me, hold on, I can't just walk outside because of all this other trauma that's happening. So how do they have a space to do it? And like we're all saying, we try to provide a safe space. My challenge has been not to just be a safe space, but to say, I can't let you sit in anger. I can't let you sit in resentment. I can't let you sit in hurt. I can't let you sit in misinformation. It's okay that we saw something that was done wrong, but do you understand it wouldn't have mattered if it was Black, white, Latino, Asian, it was wrong. And how do you acknowledge that it was wrong and then say, it's not the first time this has happened? So for me, I had to take my personal feelings, like I said, not very church-like. Personal feelings is like, this ain't new, but in the same breath, I'm glad the society is noticing it. I feel that some of my brothers, they know that I'm like, hey, talk to me in 3 months. Will this still be a topic? Will this still be a concern? So I've had to say, okay, like we talked about, back to the basics when it came to how we function with our young people. That made me go even further back to the basics. What are we called to do as followers of Christ? How do we handle this? Because things have been happening to cultures for a long time. We're not the first culture. We won't be the last. How do we deal with it? How does the Bible speak to it? And that whole loving your neighbor, you can't say I hate you and love you at the same time. It just doesn't work. So it's been an interesting track, and I know that, Phil, you've been walking part of it with me, so it's just like, I'm not trying to say too much, but in the same breath, I'm like, it has been my dream, my desire to see the church at the front of this saying, look, We have to be the example of what the world needs to see of how to reconcile relations between people and what it looks like to walk together, value each other at the same level, and say that I'm going to use my platform of influence to continue to spread that. That's my dream. And like Lane knows, me and him chit chat all the time. So it's like, I was like, Lane, you my brother. I don't have no questions for you. We've done stuff together and I plan to still partner with it. And it's like, I want people to understand the church has to be their place. There's no way to legalize it. There's no way to put it in the law to change people's hearts. Hearts don't change without Christ. And if the church doesn't show the example, the people won't be drawn to it. So I'm gonna shut up because I'm starting to preach. I'm sorry.
Yes, amen, brother. Thanks for sharing, man. And all three of you all, thanks for being on this call. I'm gonna have one last question, but I do want to thank you guys just for this work during this time. I know you guys may not get a whole bunch of thank yous and pats on the back for just all the stuff you guys have put in, driving to every student's home, all the drive-throughs, we won't call them drive-bys, Lane, but all the different things that you guys have done. It's been a lot of work. I know it's been a lot of work, and yeah. I know your students appreciate it, whether or not they say thank you. The families appreciate it, whether or not they say thank you. Your pastor appreciates you, whether or not you say thank you. So thank you for all the stuff that you've done. So just during this time, what is just your one takeaway from all of this? What's the one thing you've learned in the middle of all of this from any of the stuff we talked about just from this time? So we'll start with you, Jerren.
Yeah, one thing, I've learned a lot. So that is a good question. Aside from all the technology I've had to learn, which has been helpful, I think, like I was saying, asking myself this question, like without all of this, the glitter and the glam of youth ministry, what is youth ministry really about? And I think it's about making each student feel loved. Is how can I make every single one of my students feel like I love you and I know you and I want to share that, the love of Christ with you. And that's, and so I've often said that youth ministry is kind of like the art of being awkward. Because like with youth ministry, it's like, you're just like super awkward. It's like, hi, I'm this random adult and I just want to tell you I love you, like awkward. So it's like, how do I just live into that awkwardness and be like, I'm going to love you no matter how awkward and weird you think I am, So, and especially during this time, it's like, how can I find a way to break through, when I can't actually see you, take you to coffee and, like whatever. How can I make you feel loved and connected, So yeah, making everyone feel loved.
Amen. Thank you. Andre.
I would say the one thing I've learned is that I've really pushed into our young people and my crew of folks that volunteer, and inclusive of myself, holding on to a personal walk with Christ, something that they pour into and get poured into from his word, from their choice of choosing him. A lot of the glitz and glamour that we've done, it encourages them to want to come back to church, but it's them holding on to Christ that I'm really needing them to have. Because the kids that we've not had as much hand on and the kids that we have most of a hand on, it's been the same questions, just different ways. And it all comes back to, how do I get closer to Christ? How do I make sure he hears my prayers? What do I have to, and it's like, okay, y'all need to really understand what it means, what he's done, and let's hold to that, because that can take us everywhere else. So that's the one thing I've pushed and I've held on to now.
Thank you, man. Lane.
I think this season has kind of reinforced a truth that, I keep realizing and then pushing away, is that personal care and emotional health is really important. And Jesus has to be the way in which we arrive there. I think that we have to have healthy rhythms of being able to lament and exercise gratitude all the time. I think we just need to completely surrender to that emotional process, because if you don't, you just get emotionally constipated and you end up having to not deal with things in a way that's helpful. Because there's been a lot to grieve in this season. There just has. And if we just say like, oh, it's okay though, it's okay, it's not okay. I mean, life has been disrupted, tragedies have hit, people have been killed. I mean, it's been really difficult. And in the same breath, there's a lot that God has done that we can be grateful for in the midst of all of this. And we've seen his body shine so brightly in the midst of tragedy and in the midst of pandemics. And so being able to hold gratitude and lament in tension has been a really helpful thing for me personally. So.
Yeah, dudes, we are super thankful for sitting down with us. I mean, there's plenty of stuff. Phil and I would like to continue this, obviously, with how to move forward, because so often in the church, right, the idea of the youth and the youth pastor is they're over there, and yet, as you guys are seeing and have spoken into the heart of the church, even just through this brief video, there's so much for the church to learn, not simply from the youth and junior high and high school and young adults, but from folks like you who have taken on this mantle to lead the youth, that there's a voice to be heard there, right? And so just like with the racial injustice, it's not that the Black community, the brown community have not had a voice. There's always a voice there. It's the question of, what do we do with the voice? Are we moving aside and giving room for that voice, right? And that's what you guys are speaking into, allowing the kids to speak in. So for those of you who watch, make sure you subscribe, because we're going to sit down with Andre, Jaron, and Lane again, because this has been life-giving for me, and I know it has been for Phil. And so we totally appreciate the three of you. We appreciate, like Phil was saying, we appreciate you pouring into the youth of the nation, because we all went through the art of being awkward, which I think that's going to be the title of this video, because that is just brilliant. The art of being awkward, youth of a nation. Everyone did it, and yet we all forget so easily. We push. So thank you so much. Blessings upon each one of you. That's Phil Berlin. He's to my left. Lane, Andre, and Jaron, we super thank you. For those you watching, make sure you subscribe right now to New Wine UnCorked, because we're going to be back together with these three again to speak into another episode of New Wine UnCorked. So for New Wine UnCorked, I'm Matt Farrell. That's Phil. We'll see you on the flip side.